What's up, guys? See this? It's a sweater. It's sweater weather. I'm in love with it. We got some work to do on all three of the bikes. So we're going to start with the blue bike. Its problem is that the rear wheel won't engage. Clutch is slipping, I think. So I'm just going to try and, let me see, tighten the flower nut, see if we can get it started. These are new clutch pads. I had some trouble getting this clutch going. The main problem was just that I forgot to put the keyway back in. So that shouldn't be what the problem is now. I think maybe just the pads compressed. That's what I'm hoping. It's those cheaper rubber style pads. And that was actually the first time I ever replaced clutch pads. So we took out the little set screw, tightened it 2 notches. I'm gonna put this back in. When tightening your clutch, what makes it a lot easier is if you actually pull in the clutch lever. Otherwise, it'd be really hard to turn this flower nut. Alright, we're good. I need to adjust the brakes, mainly the back one, but we're good for now. Let's move on to the next bike. So, what happened with this bike is I was just riding to this store. I just started it up, fired up, and then it started kind of losing its power, and then it just died. So we cleaned the carburetor, didn't do anything. So I suspect it's the spark plug. It's just one of the cheap stock plugs. Got the Z4 on it. And just based on how it kind of just died, when you go to start it, it kind of kick a couple times, but never quite catch. In my experience, it's usually the spark plug. So we're gonna take it out and try it. It's possible it could be a CDI or magneto. I have replaced magnetos before. I've never had to replace a CDI. When choosing which bikes to work on first, this might seem pretty obvious, but I'll pick the bike that I think has the simplest problem to solve. We have 3 bikes, 1 was running, 2 weren't running. I knew what the problem with that one was. It was just the clutch was slipping. I'm not sure what the problem with this one is, so we saved it for last. Now we have 2 running bikes. There's no point doing the most complicated problems first if you don't have a running bike. Most of the time I'd go ahead and check it for spark, put it up against the motor, spin the back tire, but it's probably about time for this one to go anyways. I'm gonna go grab a new plug. Since this is just my around town go to work bike, I'm just gonna go ahead and put in one of the stock plugs that comes with these motors. Normally I'd go with an NGK B6HS for the PK80s or a B8HS for the YD100. But go ahead and use this one. Might as well get rid of it. Man, I love this motor. Alright, so a quick update on the YD100. What's going on is basically the first time we took the cylinder head off after we had run the engine, I don't know, for a month, I can't remember, we noticed chipping above one of the ports. Now I went ahead and ported the motor anyways in hopes that that chip didn't get worse, but the last time I had this head off, the chip had actually started to run all the way up to the top of the motor. So we went ahead and just decided to go all out, give her one last good run down the dirt road. It's probably about 20 miles in total. A lot of full throttle, and I'm expecting it to look pretty bad in there. I'm going to go ahead and take the head off, take the piston off. I'm going to put fresh ones on. I'm also going to go ahead and take this reed valve off. It's not doing anything for me. Didn't expect it to. Yes, the piston is windowed. I do have a big carburetor to put on there. I just never got around to it, guys. Eventually we'll stick it on there and see what happens. But right now I just want to get back to stock with a fresh head and a fresh piston. So let's go ahead and see how bad it looks. In order to do this, because the clearance is really tight on this frame, I have to loosen the whole motor, tilt it to take the head off and cylinder. It also means that I got to take off the reed, carburetor, exhaust, and we're just going to go ahead and skip all that, and ta-da! Of course, the new cylinder doesn't come with studs, so I'm going to have to take the studs out too. Hooray! I'm going to have to make a new gasket, of course. I forgot about that. No big deal, it's easy to do. It didn't get any worse. You guys are probably not going to see anything. I expected them to really peel away, but they didn't. And if I'm completely honest, I probably could have kept riding this for months. Worst case scenario, it's still good for a backup. So I'll keep it. I'll keep the piston. And we're still going to put the new ones on. I don't think I ever showed you guys the window piston that I made. It's not spectacular, but it worked. In a few of my past videos, I had comments asking how I made gaskets for cylinders. This is also the same way I did it for the case. That was a little more elaborate, but it's the same idea anyways. So this is Felpro gasket material. I can't tell you exactly which one to buy because, well, my memory is not great. But as long as you have one that's fuel and oil resistant, you're good. This just so happens to be fuel, oil, and water resistant. It's like a kind of felt paper material. This is what I've been using. Seems to work just fine. I'm just going to put one base gasket on because that's what the motor came with originally. And we'll probably check the squish band just in case because this is an aftermarket cylinder. But I assume the clearance and tolerances should all be the same. Obviously, you want to make sure you have enough gasket material to overhang all the flat edges, okay? And you also need to make sure that the space between the studs for the head and the cylinder wall gets a good seal. Otherwise, it'll leak out your stud, okay? So what I like to do, after placing it down and making sure we got enough overhanging gasket material, I have to take something hard. Usually I'll take a hammer to push down so we can get kind of a semicircle pressed into the gasket material. And you want to make sure while you're doing this, the gasket does not move. Otherwise you're going to mess up your lines and mess up your cut. Now my lighting kind of sucks, so you might not be able to see it too good, but we have a circle here that we can start cutting. Go ahead and poke a hole just to get it started. Now at the end of the lines where you pushed it against the cylinder wall, we'll go ahead and connect those just straight together. When you're doing this, don't be afraid to put a fresh, sharp blade in your razor. It's just going to save you a lot of headache, especially if you don't have a lot of gasket material to work with. Now you're going to need to cut on the outside of the trace line. If you cut right on the trace line, you see that it's still not going to fit, and you're going to end up having to shave a bunch of this away. Okay, so cut on the outside of the trace line. Normally I do, I just forgot. As soon as I turn the camera on, I forget a lot of stuff. Alright, so I'm going to keep trimming this up until it fits, and it needs to fit as close as you can get it so the gasket just kind of falls down without putting a lot of pressure on the corners. So we'll be back. And that is good enough. Now this next part's pretty easy. You're just going to put your blade down in the cavity and follow it with the blade. But aluminum's pretty easy to shave with a knife, so you want to try and follow the wall as best as you can without shaving off little flakes of aluminum. If you do, it's not a big deal, just make sure you blow them out before you put it on the motor. Alright, I'll take my scissors and trim along the edge, but you don't actually have to trim the gasket all the way to the base. You only need to do that if you want it to look good. So, I got my little poker here. Kind of line it up with your eyeballs first. Now normally I will take my flathead and slowly just kind of chew away at the hole to open it up. I left it outside, I don't feel like getting it, so pencil to the rescue, and we'll do the rest outside. Alright, when you do go to open these up for the studs, be careful and don't just make a small hole and then cram it down onto the studs, because the weakest part of this gasket is between the studs and the cylinder walls. If you tear this little section right here, there's a good chance you're going to have a leak, and then you got to take it off and do it all over again. That plus the fact that you're doing all this work, you have to diagnose the problem to figure out what it is, and if it's not the gasket and you do all this again, it's gonna suck. Alright, so we're gonna clean these up carefully and get it on the engine. When you get your cylinder off, guys, take a rag and stuff it around the connecting rod so that stuff doesn't fall down into your crankcase. Well, that's gone. I've got spares, but I would like to find that. Oh, wow. Okay. That was the luckiest find ever. Of the two different types of piston pin clips that I've used, these ones with the single ears have seemed to work out the best. When you get them in, they hold into the grooves better, they don't wiggle around. They're not perfect, sometimes you still have to bend them, expand them a little bit, but they seem to just be better than the ones with two ears. I've had a lot of the ears break off of the two-ear version of these. It's like the spring is a more brittle material or something, I don't know. Needle bearing and the wrist pin look fine. All in all, I think this piston, just like the cylinder, had many more miles on it. It's kind of a shame. I'm kind of upset that I could have left it in there for so much longer, but at least now I know. Our new piston looks fine. New wrist pin, good deal. And this one came with 3 clips, but unfortunately they're the twin-eared version. Probably going to try and reuse the other ones if I didn't mess them up too bad trying to take them out. So we'll see. Did not come with a needle bearing, but that's okay. This one looks fine. Arrow pointing towards the exhaust. The piston ring pins on the intake side, so we're good there. And with these clips, I don't know if you can see in the camera, but it's fully seated and fills out that whole ring. You don't want to be able to stick a screwdriver in there or pliers and be able to wiggle it around. If it wiggles, that's not good. Expand it, try it again. Trickiest part is making sure that the gap in the piston ring stays over the pins. I like to move around when they're expanded. And we got the bottom one. Alright. Now I just got to put some studs on the intake and the exhaust, mount it all up, see if it runs. I'm going to check the squish. I already got it torqued down. I've never done this before, but from what I understand is you take a piece of solder, get it up against the cylinder wall, make sure it's not in the transfer, the intake, or the exhaust port, and then turn over your engine. And the piston should push it up against the squish band. I can see where it squished it a little bit. Not much. I don't even need to measure that. It's definitely more than half a millimeter. It's probably close to a millimeter, which is probably too much. But after I break in this piston and cylinder, I'll retorque the head. That might bring it down just a little bit because that's a fresh gasket. Put the cylinder on backwards. And then I tightened everything up. Sure did. Sure did. Alright, we're getting there. Most of you guys already know the double nut technique to take studs out and put studs in, but just in case you're new to this, if you need to remove a stud, assuming it's not damaged, or install a stud, you can use the same technique. Just take a nut, take another nut, put them both on the same stud, and you're going to tighten them against each other. So you're going to tighten one and loosen the other. Just going to tighten them against each other. You don't got to make them real tight unless the stud is really rusted in there. Okay? Now for taking the stud out, you're going to use the inner nut and you're going to loosen. There you go. The stud will come out. In most situations it works just fine. Alright, so for installing the stud, you're going to tighten it with the outer nut. With these studs, because they're steel and it's the exhaust, the hottest part of the engine, just put them in until they're snug. Don't put a lot of pressure into them. You don't want them butted up against the aluminum real tight, because they have different expansion rates. It can cause issues like cracked or stripped threads or cold welding. So just get them in there snug and that's it. And then you're just going to loosen the outer one first, tighten the inner one, and you're good to go. So our plug was looking pretty good. It's a nice looking plug. That's how we were running with the past setup. I'm going to use the same plug. Nothing wrong with it. But if it fouls up, we'll know we're going rich. I think we will run rich because after we ported this motor, I put in a bigger jet because it was getting more air and needed more fuel. And now we're going back to a stock cylinder. Airflow is probably not going to be as good. I suspect that we're going to have to jet down. But for now, I think it's okay because it's a new cylinder, new piston. I'd rather run it rich for the break-in, at least for one tank. I don't feel like mixing up a 20 or 25 to 1 fuel right now. It's got 32 to 1 in it. It's good oil, it's good fuel. So I'm just going to keep running 32 to 1 with the new cylinder and piston. But we'll keep the bigger jet in it. Richer mixture, more oil. Hopefully it'll be alright. Hopefully it don't foul up too bad. But we'll know because we know what this looks like. Sounds all right. After we break it in, we'll take it for a speed run, see how it does. Yeah, it's a good boy. He's a good boy. Yeah, he's a good boy. Last thing I'm going to do today, I think, is put on these mirrors I got. They're flexible, but they're real stiff, like real stiff. So they shouldn't move around so darn much like these bar-in ones do. This is just a super cheap one on here right now. It's popping off. But even the more expensive ones, I noticed that with the vibration on these bikes, it doesn't really matter how much you tighten these down. They still move all over the place the first time you hit like a small pothole. But with these, I'm hopeful. So I'm gonna throw them on. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. We fixed 3 bikes, and yeah, I'm happy with the outcome. You know, I'm still surprised that that cylinder and piston looked exactly the same as it did the last time we took the engine apart, and that was after like really pushing it hard in the last video. So at least we can still keep them as a backup because I've got the reed. So all right, see you next time.